Jean, tell us a little bit about your motivation for creating Split Rock Arts and its placement in the larger Adirondacks area, but also in the local community.
So it's a brand new initiative, and it came about because in 2020 I moved up here and part-time. I live in the Hudson Valley, but I moved to this place. I began to put down some roots with my larger extended family here. And when I arrived, seeing the natural beauty of this place, I knew it would be the perfect setting for a residency for artists whose practice centers around ecological issues. I've been to many residencies. I feel so much gratitude, for the time and the space that different residencies have created for me and my practice in the past, and it just sort of seemed like a natural fit. And then I met Jamie Phillips and Joan Malouf and John Davis and Chris Marin. Eventually I met Jennifer Esser and Carly Summers, all from the Eddy Foundation, which is actually, this property right here was owned by the Eddy Foundation at one time recently. And so I met them and we started to talk about this idea of using their lands beyond just conservation and operating as a land trust, but to bring artists here to activate the lands and to bring people, create public access to those lands through arts programming.
How do you imagine the weaving of different collaborations with various organizations that are already involved, but also with the local communities and perhaps with the Eternal Forest Network in the future?
So, as I mentioned, this is a very new initiative, and there's many arts organizations and people who have lived here a long time who have been doing community organizing and creating spaces like Whitcomb's Art, like The Grange. And so I hope to collaborate with folks that are already in the community. Champlain Area Trails is an organization that creates trails on both public and private land to create access. They're also starting to do some arts programming, and so these are really important partners to me because they have deep roots in the community, like the Eddy Foundation, and there's already a very strong arts community here that exists. This is a little bit different because it's very sort of not niche, but it's just very sort of intimate scale. I wanted to start really small scale, get to know people in the community. So it's just one artist a year for a residence, which, seemed small, but it's actually quite an effort and quite a commitment. So yes, we had the first resident was Marina Saplina, whose project is called Soils and Spirit, and she came and did a lot of natural dyeing, went on many walks, and foraged for plant matter, and her project and created these beautiful silk dyes that she's using to make these soil objects, she calls them. So they're sort of between puppetry and sort of objects that she uses in an actual movement performance piece. So she generated a lot of her natural dye silks during that time. And during that time, just as Evgenia did during her residency, we went for a walk with John Davis, and we met other folks in the area, Craig Arden, and tried to develop those partnerships with the community, but also try to create this bridge between art and science. So bringing artists whose practice centers around ecological issues means that they have to really understand some of the ecological thinking that is specific to this place. So they can't, if they're coming from another place, if they don't live here already, then that takes a little bit of time, and really understanding what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, what the strategies are so that they can be replicated elsewhere. All that work that's happening, right, with the Edu Foundation, with Northeast Wilderness Trust, with the Adirondack Council, all of that good work that's happening can influence an artist's practice. And I think artists are wonderful storytellers, and they have work in different mediums to tell those stories. But essentially, they can work with scientists, with ecologists, with environmentalists, and with the local community to tell important stories about this area. So Marina Saplina was our 2023 artist resident, and this year we have Evgenia Emets from Eternal Forest. So again, creating opportunities for artists to talk to conservationists and so forth. You know, Evgenia's practice really got the community engaged and out on specific trails to really slow down and find those special moments that she noticed when she was walking the trails every morning for 3 weeks. So Evgenia was able to create a really nice public programming. So it's not just about these other nonprofits that exist, these other arts organizations and conservation organizations, but it's also just about all the local community members. And there's, you know, a lot of people that have lived here many years who have experiences in the forest and in the area who can contribute. And I think artists can create that platform for the community to have that discourse. So, you know, we'll see who comes next year, but those are our first 2 years of residence.
So how do you imagine the arts practice changing when artists are actually merged into the forest process and spending more time in the forest? And how do you feel this might affect the larger art world and the whole aspect of art and how it might change there?
So our vision is to have a studio in the woods, working with a very tight budget. You know, the idea is to build essentially a platform tent. So a platform with a canvas tent near Bouquet Mountain in Essex, New York, with the idea that the artists can, of course they can spend the night there, but it'll be pretty rustic. So at the very least it can provide a studio in the woods for the artists during their residency, and it can provide additional income for the residency when the artist is not here using it, because we could actually put it up on a platform like Hip Camp. So that's really important because we want the artists to sort of get, you know, artists are coming from all over the world, and we want them to be really kind of with, just like when you go camping, that really kind of with the trees, with the plants, with all the creatures that live here, and to be able to witness all of the changes that happen over time. You know, we have big weather events here over the last few years. We've had a tornado, it's been a flood zone. So there are dramatic changes that are happening even here in the Adirondacks and the Northeast in terms of shifts in temperature and weather. So just being able to really be in the forest, I think is important for these artists that we're sort of curating in terms of, you know, who comes and does the residency. These artists are people who whose practice again is centered on environmental issues, are people who want to commune with plants and animals. So having the studio in the woods is important, and that's part of our vision. Can you remind me of the second half of the question?
And the second half is, how do you feel
how
that possibility can influence the larger art world?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, it really shifts the artist practice and the stories that they tell, and the way they tell the stories. So not only like the messaging, if we can say there's messaging in art, but also the form. So, you know, people come and they start working with natural dyes and so forth. So there's a real practice that can be born out of this kind of everyday immersion. So in terms of the larger art world, I think the larger art world, first of all, well, okay, I'll say this. The larger art world is very diverse. It is, a multiplicity of things, of forms, of mediums, of contexts, of communities, of economies. So I don't know that I feel this needs to be the way that every artist practices, of course. But I do think there is a growing movement within the art world to, of course, address contemporary issues, which it always has. And one of those is that people are thinking a lot about today, is about ecology and the environment. So I think for me, that's where my practice is centered. I studied literature, then I studied communication or graphic design, and then I went on to study interdisciplinary art. But in the middle there, I spent a bunch of time living on a farm and studying ecology for a period of time. So I'm always trying to think about in my own practice how to bring those two worlds together. So this residency is just another way in which I'm sort of honoring that past and that passion for plants, and learning along the way and getting to meet amazing people like Evgenia and Marina, and to bring those people and to sort of invigorate at least my own experience here in the Adirondacks, and hopefully other people in the community as well.
Thank you.